I was going to, I still may have to, there's so much information that we have now on events coming up, and just on the alien, extraterrestrial, and terrestrial thing itself, there's so much to cover. I had one other section I wanted to deal with on this, which would be tying it in for the reasons now for everything happening as it is. What I wanted to do is to segue and give you a little background on some of these creatures or folks or whatever you want to call that have been involved with people here on Earth for so long, and this whole issue has been started. That in itself is one program. Last week, of course, we gave the Midwest connection because they had some people here from Indiana and from St. Louis and all like that. So I don't know. We'll see how far it goes on this one. I still think it's best to divide that and bring, especially now that some information and pictures I want you to see you won't be able to see. But we'll have to go from there again. Either way, let's just start, if we can, with what we want to call the middle section, or what I call TEAS 2, Terrestrials, Extraterrestrials, and Aliens 2. And, all right. I want to say hello to all of you, and thank you for attending the Meta Center for our second in our series of what we call TEAS, and of course it's nothing to drink. That's terrestrial, extraterrestrial, and alien, and the agendas so from them. The point is that now, as we move deeper into the Aquarian consciousness, into the cosmic age of Aquarius, if you would, we're finding that it's time to think. This is the time for the thinkers. This is the time for folks to begin to put things together and reach some kind of conclusions. And as you saw by the flyer, we feel that that time is one that is not only upon us, but we ought to get some kind of background on what is happening in general in order to be able to get more specific about events, weather control, mind control, and things that are happening that seemingly are unrelated. Almost anyone metaphysical now realizes that something is different, something is wrong, something is right. The wrongs, of course, are obvious. Everybody's getting sick, plagues are hitting, there's all kind of weather modification. You can't tell one season from the other. It just goes on and on. The things that are good that people are finally beginning to awaken, they're beginning to challenge, they're beginning to try to understand what is happening, and realizing that they have to spend more time with their own consciousness, that they have to do for self. And even though people are flocking to the hospitals, many people, of course, are taking the what we call homeopathic and naturopathic route. This is all in keeping with the times that we're in. It's one thing to be chemical, which they now use alchemical. L in chem being from chemet and chem, and being able to use things that are for chemical people. But when you're a biological person with some chemistry, you have to also go into natural things in order to keep yourself alive. Since there are different races here, different needs for those body types, to group everything that everybody should have this, everybody should have that, is one of our first mistakes. Different people, even though the souls may inhabit various bodies, when you're in a certain body, you need certain things for that body type to function. And you cannot take things that other people, and even though they may all have souls, we've covered that before, need for their body types. So we need to understand that very clearly and very closely. So I want to start off with a little bit of what would be called the racial connections. And I want to start off with the topic that most people don't hear enough about so-called Negroes, and about so-called people with melanin. That's what we call, archaeologically speaking and anthropologically speaking, the Negroids. I'm going to cover some areas here, and I'm going to also call on a person, Dr. Abraham, who happens to be here today too, which will also, he didn't know I was going to do this for him or with him, but I'm going to also call on him to share some things with you too. Let's go back first of all, since what isn't usually covered in these metaphysical texts and in the books that you hear on Art Bell and the writers, is what is the Negroid. There is no such thing, of course, as a Negro. Negro does not mean black per se. Negra was black. It has nothing to do with that. Negroid or Negro comes from a takeoff on the word Necro, N-E-C-R-O. And if you spell that out, N-E-C-R-O, and then you close at the end of the C, you get a G, Negro. Negro is the dead, the unknowing, the lost, the people who do not know who they are. Negro means necrophil, necrophilia, places of the dead, places of the lost, the city of this and that. It is a made-up word that actually has some context because it means people lost in consciousness. People who are dead. Dead on a planet that gives life. Dead to whom they don't know and who they do know. When we're looking again at Negroids, and I'll start off with that per se, you're talking about a very ancient people that have one thing in common with lots of other people in the galaxy, seemingly in the cosmos, and that is melanin. Melanin is a key for everything on this planet, and it's the thing that separates racial types and body types now. Melanin is a gift from the gods. Now the point is, when you say gods, what are you talking about? You mean a gift from the Lord, as many Christians would say, or if you're a Buddhist or if you're Islamic, I don't even want to go into that part. But what you're looking at when you say gods, you're talking about people in different dimensions, people much smarter, people around a little bit longer in body types, that have come into certain areas in this universe, not so much in the cosmos. When you say cosmos, you're talking about the whole conglomeration. But you have almost what is now called 7 different universes, not just one. And in this universe, there's been a domination with people who have come in to practice godship. Now, godship can be either feminine or masculine. Prefer to say God is good, we can say that too. But in many cases, these people are non-sexual. They have come here on what is called the 9th and 10th dimension. They have no physical bodies. There are not too many physical planets, except in this particular universe anyway. Most planets do not take on physical substances. That's what we've been told before, but in research it seems to be the best way to put it. And this particular planet Earth was a homemade place. It was a place many have called Nibiru. I argue that sometimes too, but I'm not familiar with the story of it again. It's a place that a lot of scientists from 4 different systems, the Pleiades, again what is called again the Sirius, or the Sirian group again, Canis Major, Canis Minor, people from Procyon and people from Halcyon, all got together to put 22 planets like this together at one time in different universes to see what could be done if everything you could think of had a chance to come together. This is why the planet Earth is so diverse. This is why the planet Earth is so, how can I say, beautiful. You have extremes of climate, or had it. The climates are becoming one. You can all begin to see that, and that will happen supposedly by 2012. But you have here ice in beautiful formations of ice. You have snow that goes along with it. You have tropical rain. We have tropical places again that are very arid, if you would, and even rainforests. We have deserts here again, and we have plains. Every type of climate you can think of, you can actually be born into or travel into. And as you travel to these places on our Earth, it's just like you're traveling to other planets. Because some planets have only one season all the time. Only one tropical plain. Only one desert. They are planets that do not have all the amalgamations that we have here. This was a well thought out thing. The reason why things here are so complex is because you have so many different kind of thoughts at work here. This was an amalgamation to see what would happen if all different creatures from different places could be brought together with their own kind of climate, and then to see if they could evolve whatever species one up to reach a height to get back to what would be called the universal prime creator. Now, I use that term simply because it says universal, which means the vast. It's prime meaning first, and then creator meaning creator of, creatus, causing to come forth from. So here you have everything. And as we have seen, these everythings can't seem to get along for too long. And there's a reason for that, because there were also 2 other subgroups that didn't like the idea that all of these amalgamated species or universes or people could come together to create 22 that they didn't have any part of. And so therefore they became like invaders. They began people to try and see if they could usurp. Their creatures have been many. Named Lucifer, supposedly the fallen one. We've had Anu, supposedly from the Anunnaki, the ones that fell from the sky. They've had all kind of different stories that have gotten jumbled up. And then they gave a book, which was not intended for everybody on this planet, which they called the Bible, which was a usurpation of other books that were given. And some were not even given books because it was not necessary for them to read. They were communicated with telepathically. Yet we now have taken and brought up what is called religions. And as we stated before in metaphysics, and I'm very sorry, we're stepping on a lot of toes on here today, but it's not the first time. If you need a religion, then you don't need a soul. Religion is for the soul. This is a training guide to tell you what to do and what not to do. When you're born with the soul, you're born with a spirituality that needs no religion. It means that you're born understanding the rights and wrongs, and all you have to do is on the lowest plane of all, the physical plane, prove what you know. This is not reality, and the movies are trying to tell you this is not real. And if it was real, you would never have to sleep. You sleep because it is so unreal that you must get back to reality, which is a dreamlike state, in order to wake up to keep the physical plane intact. This is why the physical body degenerates, ages, and you die. It doesn't mean that you ever die. It means that that physical body wears out. And it wears out in a short space of time, less than 100 years in most cases. Or really, when it's serviceable, sometimes by 60. So I'm saying to you, if you doubt that, ask yourself, why do you have to sleep? No matter how much you eat, no matter how much you pray, no matter how much you do anything, you must do what? Sleep. And if you don't sleep every 72 hours, you will die. You will sleep standing up, you will sleep driving a car, you will sleep flying a plane, you will sleep. Because you need to energize the physical body with a substance that you cannot get from anything you eat or anything else. It is pure thought. And if you understand, many people take poisons. But when they elevate their thoughts, they don't die. Other people who don't even understand how thoughts can alter frequencies take poisons and they do die. People are going around eating glass light bulbs, things like this, and they are able to do so. You say, well, what's the difference? They might be what would be called a cyclic clone. They look like you, but they're not like you. Internally, there's so much difference, as you say. In many cases, physiognomists, people who study the human body, when they cut open some people, they are amazed by what they say. That doesn't make the records, what they see. They don't have all the organs in place at the places we think of. We are a complex organization here. We are a species here so intermixed that we are just beginning to catch on to what's happening. And as we catch on, they're trying to knock us out. So let's go back again to looking at some not so ancient terms, but terms that we must think of as places in order to get to the hub of what I want to bring you to. We have what is called Greece. We're told here under a certain group of people that Greece, again, was the precursor again of Rome, and that the Roman and Grecian empires were the biggest ever seen. Well, when we understand one thing, ancient Greece, which goes back past Rome and so on like this, was called Ionia. The Ionians were a Negroid-looking people. Now, anything that came after the Ionians were misplaced or implaced, or travelers who came to a land that were not the indigenous people of that land, but people whose history now, a very brief one, we've been indoctrinated with. There are reasons for all of that. When we look at what would be called Romans, and we look at the Pope, and we look at the Vatican, we understand that there was in the tip of Italy there Sicilians, and that they were different from the upgrade Romans, and that they fought each other, and so on again like this. We'll understand that the more ancient name for Italy was Etrusca. The Etruscans were Negroid looking. Using again their terminology. But you don't hear anything about Etrusca too much again. When you go again to in the land of what would be now called Africa, there's no such place called Africa in ancient history. You cannot study ancient history and look for Africa, because Africa doesn't exist. If you notice, all of these continents now are named with the letter A and end with the letter A, except for one, Europe, which is not a continent. But they now told you there's 7 continents. So you see, all these lies are very hard when you go searching, because you're searching for something that doesn't exist. Let's just say that this matrix and physical is reality. So let's just look at the reality of something that doesn't have reality. Let's make something out of nothing. Let's go back now to Ethiopia. Well, when we find Ethiopia, you find that Ethiopia's ancient name was Judah. You talk about the Lion of Judah, Haile Selassie, well, this is what they were talking about. But they've changed all of this. So you can't even do research correctly now, and people get to arguing over superfluous childlike things, which even has no beginning other than the Roman, Greco-Roman culture. Romulus and Remus. The same kind of thing, and they told you they started from what? Romulus and Remus. Where were they born from? You better remember.
Like
where? Wolves. Wolves. Dogs. Okay? This is what they tell you, the start of Rome. Well, all of these are allegorical. You have to begin to look past this foolishness. Even his story, the finally got teeth. They say, well, his story is his story. But if I'm Negroid, my story is a mis-story. Okay? Well, that's exactly what is happening. The terms. You're given the devil. When you spell the devil backwards, what do you get?
Life.
Life. And when you spell lives backwards, what do you get? Devil.
Yeah.
It's a backward way of living, which leads you to the devil. When you have to go with books and rather than going into consciousness. So I'm just trying to show you the words are all around, but nobody wants to talk about them. Why? Because you don't get paid well when you do that. You might get assassinated when you do that. Because you're waking up a soul which is so powerful that if it understands what it's in, what it's doing, the whole matrix, as they tried to show you, the whole maze comes falling down. You're the most feared people in the universe, this particular universe, because the souls that you are in and the bodies that those souls came into got locked into the lowest vibrational rate possible, that of an animal, on a physical planet that had 21 other kind of animals and mixtures and clones and cyborgs and you name it. And I'll go into each of those with you before we start today. There's what is called the Tausatian connection when you're using the word Negroids. They were influenced greatly, if you're in a Negroid type body, by what is called the star-sun system Sirius. They are the ones that influence you the most, and let's stay at the very beginning. They are the highest dimension, 9th or 10th dimension, type of intelligence in this whole part of our universe. Everybody else comes under the Sirius. The Sirius again, and I'll go into that a little bit too to give a background. There is what are called 3 suns in Sirius. Most of it just says Sirius. Sirius A is in the constellation of what is called Canis Major, the big dog. They're supposed to be about 8.7 light years away. Well, whatever that means again, 183,000 miles a second, a light year. So anyway, about 8.7 light years away. Sirius B, which is what is called white dwarf. It's a star that is supposedly nearing the end of its beam, much like our star is soon to be, if you would. Has again what is called a light that is 100,000 times fainter than Sirius A. That's why it wasn't seen for the longest. Arthur Clarke, and so they're talking about they finally discovered Sirius B. Sirius B is a very faint star, but it is the one that has planets around it. Sirius A has no planet. Sirius A, like Procyon and Alcyon, begins to control sun systems. And there are actually beings that are born on suns and on sun systems. One of the Orientals and the Japanese, and so were the last ones to be born on suns. That's why their eyes are so slatted. This is why even when their souls came into these bodies, they had to still search again for a bright light, if you would. But that's another thing then too. The Dogons of Africa, to kind of jump just a little bit around, since again they're the ones that live in Mali, in the mountains there, if you would, stated that their ancestors either came from, were part of, or were influenced by beings from Sirius. We're talking about Sirius B, not Sirius A. Keep in mind, Sirius A controls sun systems. Sirius B as in more amphibian, or a crossbreed of prototype people who both live in water and in air. And Sirius C is almost like an insect-like kingdom, if you would. But they found one thing in common, they got together, if you would. The Dogons, as they're called, were stated that they were influenced by the Nomos from the star system called Sirius. Nomo is N-O-M-M-O. And they stated that these Nomos would teach them mainly in the evening. And if they saw them in the day, they had to go to the cave. That's one of the reasons why they lived in the mountains with these caves, because these beings could not take a lot of sun and heat. But they stated that there were ancestors of them that could. They went there to these people and they were taught telepathically. This is why you'll find in most of Kemet, the people there didn't do a lot of scribing and writing. The scribes were elitists who put down on the physical plane in pictographs, vertical columns, things that you're supposed to know. They now call it again picture writing, if you would. They didn't write linear with things like this, no, because they used telepathy. And when you use telepathy, you don't have to write things down. We have been taught to write things down, to read things. And yet it comes very hard to people. But if you can begin to picture things, if you can begin to sense and look at people, you can become telepathic somewhat, because you can begin to pick up what that person is thinking by the actions, by the looks, and all throughout the area of Kemet. This is what people have tried to do. They didn't do a lot of writing. They said, well, why are there no parchments? And so there was no need for it. They tuned in the universal mind. They were able to go into the soul, bodies, and sense. And then they conveyed back and forth by thoughts. People who do a lot of talking, people who do a lot of writing, are people who have lost the sixth sense. They're people who must communicate in the best way they can is by written words, scribed words. Now, I'm not saying now that you shouldn't do this. I'm simply saying you can understand now why a lot of history was not written. And they used, again, people that they called griots, people who had excellent memories. Well, all of us would have excellent memories if we used our brains and minds. But we can if we have to write everything down. We say now if it's not written down, we can't remember it. And if we can't remember it, we forget it. You cannot forget anything that's inscribed on the matrix of the brain. It's just that you don't know how to locate it. So what are they telling you now to do? They're teaching you now to take a picture of something that you can't forget. If it's a sexual object, if it's something you love to eat, if it's something you want to have, and you tie certain thoughts to that picture, and you file it away in the neurons of your brain. Then when you see the picture, it tags itself to the thought. It's just like you use a computer. You go back and you get the picture, and then it comes revealed back. More and more we're told less and less to use our brains. Then they come and they say we use less than 1/10 of 1% of our brain. I don't know if we use any of our brain. But we're beginning to, because the very thing that the brain is supposed to do, we know. When you go to a computer, you look up one word, but you have to know the key word. Once you look up the word, everything starts unfolding. That's the way people were taught. They were told things that they couldn't forget. And then the stories with them followed on. Now we take everything as absolute proof, supposedly. Only if it's not written down, and so it cannot exist. To give you an example, the Yui tribe is near Dahomey in Africa again, have had ancestors who have had long tails. They're scaly tails. They look more or less like an amphibian tail, if you would. They've had snouts, if you would, there too. And collectively, they had a god that they worship, a deity by the name of Eniweho, something along that line, Eniweho. This, along with many other gods that people have had, interestingly enough, turns out to be a kind of either a cetacean, a creature like a mammalian, or a serpent again. Let me give you some examples for that again. In Sumer, many people like to refer back to the Sumerians and so. They had as a chief figure in their history Oannes. Oannes, and that's spelled O-A-N-N-E-S. Oannes, you find out again, was a half-gilled, upright walking creature that could live in the water or on land. Right? You had Eniweho, which we just talked about again. In North Africa, there's a lake called Lake Triton. And if you go back, you'll find out that Triton and the creature that came out of Triton, which is named after him, said his name was Triton, was also a gilled person. Upright walking, 7 to 8 feet tall, had gills. Also, again, could speak telepathically, not with the spoken word, and seemingly was very intelligent and influenced the people there in North Africa around Lake Triton. When you go to the Mediterranean area, you go to what is called the Aegean Sea. They have a place in there that's called Negroid. Negroid was, again, a guild-type person, half creature that walked upright again, and influenced the people around that area. Directly in the Mediterranean Sea, you had what is called Artemis. Artemis was a mermaid, a half-fish, half-person who did not come out of the water, but would sit on barks and so, and ships and boats and talk to the people because she could not walk upright. She actually had still. The lower half of her body was like a fin or a fish. Now, it's interesting that all of these stories come from various parts of that area that is now called the Near East, which of course had been known to us, or should be known to us as Kemet, not our Cuba land and not Africa, Kemet. And understand at one time when these people began to speak, they did not speak in vowels. They spoke in consonants. Yeah? As much as the ancient Hebrew was in consonants. Then you want to know, well, who are the Hebrew people? Understand again, it was not necessary to get linear letters, to get a word, to get sentences and structure and syntax. That's not necessary unless you're using a tongue. And many of the people who taught these people did not have a cleft tongue. They didn't have a solid tongue. The tongue was forked. And if you know, there's still a saying amongst the American native here, the Native American, persons speak with forked tongue, which led to hissing sounds. You couldn't form vowels with the forked tongue. So you either did it telepathically, or you had a whole different language and a whole different set of pictures. They have said one picture, what, worth 1,000 words. Same thing with the brain. When you start to use pictures, you begin to awaken the part of the dormant portion of your brain. When you use letters and words, you can never awaken that, because it takes too many words, there's too many letters. One picture, whole sentences, whole things that have happened. When you dream, and many people, of course, did not have a lot of conversations in dreams. They had pictures in dreams. Now you're awakening the thought mind. This is why you can go so far and do so much in the dream work, if you will. I want to go to kind of break down and explain, and there seemingly are just thousands of different kinds of races in our cosmos. But I want to deal with just a few. I start off with the chief one, probably the progenitor of all, and that is the Sirian. Sirians are generally, and again we're talking about from Sirius B and Sirius C, not Sirius A. Sirius A rules sun systems. Sirius B, as a creature or a person or a thing, or whatever you would, 4.5 to 6.5 feet tall, usually an amphibian. And also on Sirius B there is a moon from which many of the people that we refer to now as the Olmecs came from. The Olmecs, and they stopped the history of the Olmecs by misusing what we call the word Mayan here. Anytime you say Mayan, you mean Olmec. That is the prejudiced anthropologist or ignorantly taught anthropologist word for Olmec. Why? Because the Olmecs, if you ever seen the pictures of them, look completely Negroid. And they were found everywhere in the Western Hemisphere. They were found not only in South America, but in North America. They were found in Canada. They were found in big barges and things that have been found on the sea. They've been found in picture writing, in caves under the ocean. Olmecs were everywhere. And they were the people there, the most ancient people that you can usually find here, and still call them human, meaning they have truncation, arms, bipedal, this kind of thing. They were called Olmecs. Anything Mayan is a lie. It simply is something that had to be brought about. So rather than say Olmec, which everybody knows is Negroid, and in fact, some of the books used to say that they didn't classify or like to give too much credit to the Olmecs because they worshiped deformed babies. Now, what this had to do with anything, I don't know, but that's one of the things that they say in archaeology. Well, the reason why they say they worship deformed babies was because many of the pictures of the Olmecian baby had a cleft in the head and like a diamond up here by what we would now call the middle forehead, like many of the Islamic people now put the dot up there. Yeah. It simply meant that these people were very frontal-lobed, and yet they also had long heads, which meant that they were very psychic. And their babies, of course, were able to do things. They could move objects in birth. They could levitate things. They were very psychic, if you would, very spiritual people. So they don't like to deal with hardly any of that. But at any rate, when you're talking about Sirius, you're talking mainly about B and C. There are 3 suns at least. There may be more, but 3 suns that I've been able to do research on. And all this research comes very hard. And that is B and C. A rules people on the 12th, 13th dimension, sun people. B and C have people who live on planets that go around suns. This is why they can definitely say to you, there is nothing new under the sun. Because until you graduate through the sun that your planet is around, you haven't evolved. You're still physical or dimensional. You can't go to the 9th and 10th dimension and become a sun person. Sons of the sun are people who come out of their bodies, go wherever they want to, take on that body type for a while, and go on. They are mental people, having nothing to do with the physical plane. There is another group that is called Orion. And if you notice in most of Kemetic history, and I'll stop using the word Africa, stay with me, most of Kemetic history, when you see it here, you'll find that the Egyptians, who were looked upon, especially around the 18th dynasty, as almost alchemists, alchemy, they were people, again, who with the pyramid, one shaft, or they call it breathing holes or air holes, I don't know what they call, but this is what they use. One points toward Sirius, the other points toward Orion. Sirius has been known, again, as the dog star, because it's in Canis Major and Canis Minor. Orion has been known as the hunter. Orion and creatures and Pleiadians and so that come from there are hunters. In fact, well, we'll get into the Pleiadians a little bit on them too. The dog stars has been said as a companion to man and mankind. It's said that the only ones who took a lot of time with the creatures that were here were the people from Canis Major and Minor. Well, that's fitting, because they were one of the four that started the planet Earth in the first place, that constructed the planet Earth, and as well should. The deceivers, of course, well, let me move on and still talk again about what we were calling out the Pleiadians. The Pleiadians seems to have brought forth at this time three different kinds of people. Since the Pleiadians are in Orion, again, you'll find that in the Pleiades, you have what is called the Blonds. This is usually what most of the Caucasian people like to refer to. Why? Because in the Netherlands and in the Baltic area, you have blonde people. Blonde is an absence of melanin. It means that the hair has turned light. It cannot hold pigmentation. Just like a very pale skin cannot hold pigmentation. Now, when a soul comes into this body, there are certain things for it to learn, and it has to be on a certain part of the planet. Because being pale-skinned, they cannot live where there's a lot of sun, and they did not take a lot of chlorophyll, because what does chlorophyll do? Chlorophyll is what human hemoglobin is made up of mainly. Chlorophyll is the closest thing to human hemoglobin. So you have more or less a very clear, almost translucent type blood in people from the Netherlands and people that are very pale. And this is what has come to be known as blue bloods. Blue bloods meant that the veins were so close to the skin, and the skin had no pigmentation, that you could see the veins and things that carried the blood. You could see that there was blue blood. Now, blood itself, in many cases, until it oxidizes, has no color. It is just plasma. Its color comes when it mixes with any and some of the ingredients in the air of the body, except for one people. People with melanin, blood can actually be red in the vein. Sometimes even a kind of a green in the vein, and sometimes orange in the vein, depending on the amount of oxygen or nitrogen or helium in that cell. But people with very pale skins can only have blue bloods because it is the only thing that their lack of melanin presents. Now, they're gifts to all races. They're goods and bads and benefits and taking ways, if you would, from it. They came about, the Aquarian people, about 26,000 years ago. And they came to influence a certain portion of the planet by which their ancestry and their future now rest. Without these people awakening, these other ancestors could not go forth. They are time travelers, but they're new time travelers. Anybody that has a soul is automatically a time traveler. Why? Because the soul has no proximity, has no physical substance, but it gets locked in the physical substance for an experience. In a melanated body, they're able to stay both on one side and the other a little bit easier. In a non-melanated body, it's very hard to transit. It's very hard to time travel. Each of you are time travelers because you time travel every time you go to sleep. Bring it up in the Q&A if you want. I said you go to me. You want to know time travel?